Heels in the Sand Island, Seychelles Archipelago, Earth. Monday, October 2nd, 3116, 10 months later. Ironically, the opening move to the Canis Minor campaign did not take place in the constellation Canis Minor. Instead of in that patch of stars where one would look to find the oncoming assemblage arc vessel, the campaign began at a point in space nearly 20 degrees away, very near the star Sirius A. There, at a distance of 8.610 light-years from Sol, only 0.1% of a light-year short of the bright blue star itself, mankind's most distant wormhole popped into existence. We were stress-testing the new improved wormhole machinery and AI-augmented guidance algorithms to verify that we could bridge the extreme distances required to reach the enemy arc. After nearly half a minute of adjusting and stabilization of the ultra-long-range wormhole, a sensor stalk was finally poked through. The bulbous head of the stalk, studded with advanced gadgets of all types, quickly scanned the surrounding space for any natural or unnatural emissions. Instead of monitoring the test with the masses, I was watching it in real time from the comfort of the great room in my island's main lodge. Following my plan of keeping a low profile, I declined the invitation to view the test along with about 1 million other interested humans as part of the global science forum currently being hosted in Conscientia. I even had company. Watching the live feed on the room's holo projector was a small group of family and friends we'd been casually chatting up until the action had started a few moments ago. Now all were silent, transfixed on the distant sensor data showing the first close-up view of one of our nearest stellar neighbors. I will admit the first images transmitted were slightly underwhelming. I wasn't quite sure of what I'd been expecting to see, maybe amazing alien ring planets or moons around moons surrounding moons. But just another extremely bright star was not it. Then I remembered that this test wormhole, being only 1,000th of a light-year away from Sirius, meant that the portal was still 60 AU away from that star. The distance remained vast, 50% further than our own dwarf planet Pluto was from the Sun. Of course, from such a vantage, the dog star would still look just like any other average star, albeit a brightly shining one. I took a moment to study my companions who were still focused on the images with rapt attention. Sitting to my right and sharing my small sofa was Riho. The alien ambassador still spent time in my presence, attending me, as she referred to it. We sometimes had our own duties or meetings, which kept us apart, but the majority of the time, she was near. Next to her were Hannah and Alec. The pair were seated in separate chairs befitting their cooling relationship status, but they remained good friends and still trained together regularly. Their dedication to the cause was proven by maintaining the thrice-weekly combat training sessions. I attempted to join them when I could, but was lucky if I made one session every week or two. To my left were seated Kella and Pickett. My daughter and her inamorata were sharing one end of the second sofa, a sign that their relationship had definitely not cooled. I continued to be happy for them as they had slowly transitioned their relationship from previously almost exclusively existing in the virtual and out into the physical, real world. I'd recently learned that the pair were constructing an isolation lodge together, some sort of ice palace located in Antarctica of all places. After I learned more details, I was actually intrigued. Their lodge was to be a geothermal oasis built on the rim of a partially submerged caldera of a semi-active volcano located on the South Shetland Islands, just off the edge of Antarctica. They'd made me promise not to visit until their work was finished. Later, I'd expressed my concerns privately to Naomi about Kayla and Pickett building their lodge on a volcano and was reassured that the planetary wormhole network could whisk them away to safety in moments if an emergency were to arise on their island. Although it defeated the purpose of isolation, the fast and easy access was just another side benefit of Ux's invention we were becoming accustomed to. Serenity and Cassius were also in attendance and were lying entwined in front of us on the Neo-Bear rug. The couple had only been a couple again for the past 2 days as Cassius no longer resided on my island. 5 months ago, the young man had followed his passions for the sea and had left the island to learn marine biology as a deckhand on a biorestoration vessel. Ironically, the vessel was part of the fleet managed by Director Karn Conlon. Naomi assured me that she was monitoring the situation. Cassius had come back earlier this week for a bit of rest and recuperation. I took that to mean that he was horny. My great-granddaughter had wasted no time in helping him with that, although I suspect the lad was now getting less R&R as a result. A side effect of Serenity spending time with Cassius was that I'd actually had to work at managing my own island for the past few days, as she'd called in a few favors in order to free her schedule. I returned to Riho to see how she was taking the wormhole sensor data. After all, she was the only one here to have actually previously seen other stars close up. She noticed my attention and smiled. I was struck at how human-like the alien had become over the past 11 months. Now, when she smiled, I actually believed she was happy. Riho had become a trusted and close friend. I found that I missed her company when we were apart. It had been a busy time for both of us. She'd begun traveling the planet both virtually and in reality to appear at various exobiology and alien linguistic study conferences, while I split my time mostly shuttling between the Earth and the Moon. My lunar duties had been varied, but now mostly involved transitioning the weapons research being finalized at Farside Station into a viable armament production network spread across the inner solar system. Some of the issues I'd helped solve or force through bureaucratic hurdles had ranged from safer antimatter production to where to store the finished warheads. We'd ended up staging the fragile warheads at a newly constructed arsenal located in the trailing Mars Lagrange point. The facility was automated and unmanned, as was the nearby interplanetary ranged wormhole generator we'd built in a halo orbit around the Lagrange point itself. The portal was close enough to the arsenal for convenient and fast shipping, but far enough away so as to survive an accidental detonation. With the system, we would be able to deliver individual warheads to either the Phobos military wormhole complex or to Vesta on a timely basis, thus reducing the danger of stockpiling antimatter locally. Omu was in attendance in my great room as well, but the android was off to the side, kneeling on one of her charging pads. Her current position prevented her from seeing the holo images directly, but she was undoubtedly monitoring the feed via the digital networks. I smiled as I took in the group. It was quite the little entourage. The fact that they were all here with me and not attending the far more spectacular public global virtual event meant a lot. Movement off towards the dining area caught my eye and earned me a disapproving glare. It was my final guest, Adele Sol Chilean, slowly panning her imager across the group. She was working on a new documentary about Riho and busy recording us as we watched the unfolding historical event. Even though she'd reminded us many times to don't look at the imager, I couldn't avoid doing so. Oops, hopefully she could edit out my slip-up. I quickly returned my focus to the view screen just as Hannah spoke. Well, they've proved that the new wormhole machinery on Phobos can reach out as far as the current distance of the assemblage arc. Ux and her team did it again. An unexpected voice replied from the room's sound system. Thank you, Hannah. I'm just happy that this time the main relays didn't blow from the energy being funneled through them. We've had to redesign them twice. We looked to one another with surprise, as we'd not expected my former wife to be online and actively monitoring our group. When I had spoken to Ux earlier, she had mentioned that the plan was for her to be busy in deep interface overseeing the test. Obviously, this was no longer necessary, which was good news. It meant that the new AI controls and algorithms were handling the calculations on their own without issue. Hi, honey, I said louder than was probably necessary. Congratulations on the successful attempt. The rest of the room spoke up, offering their own congratulations. Hannah, Riho, and Pickett took advantage of Ux's presence by seeking additional details about the ongoing test. Keela, Alec, and I just listened in, as we had already spoken with Ux earlier in the day and had heard much of it already. The kids and I had wanted to wish their mother good luck before the test series began. The impromptu question and answer session continued until Ux announced that the second phase of the test was about to begin. She would definitely be needed in deep interface this time around. We quickly said goodbye to let her get back to her work. The next phase would be verifying and fine-tuning our long-range targeting and guidance capabilities. It began with the deployment of a small autonomous targeting probe. We watched as the sensor stack penetrating the interstellar wormhole was withdrawn, and in its place, the probe was sent through. Then, after briefly poking the sensor cluster back through the wormhole into Sirius space, to verify that the probe had successfully orientated itself and come to a full stop just beyond the wormhole, The sensor stalk was withdrawn and the wormhole terminated. Over the next 10 minutes, the wormhole machinery was given a quick diagnostic, and the energy reserves on Phobos allowed to recharge. Once the hardware was ready, a new wormhole would be formed. The targeted terminus destination for the second wormhole was to be the exact same spatial location as the first. Due to galactic rotation, stellar drift, and the dozens of other spatial corrections needed, it was expected that we would miss our target. The big question was, how far would that miss be? All chat stopped as we again focused on the holodisplay. The still recording sensor stalk showed the purplish distortion ring of the second wormhole forming and punching a tunnel to the distant star. The bright flash of a tunnel suddenly receding into infinity resolved itself, revealing a distant starfield. Sirius was no longer centered in the new view, which meant that the wormhole terminus had shifted. After a short pause to verify its stability, the sensor stalk was reinserted. The starfield quickly panned around as the articulated sensor stalk brought the bright blue star into the center of the image. Riho was following the data scrolling along the edges of the display and reported, "The brightness and angular resolution of the target star matches that of the previous images." At our perplexed look, she explained, "This indicates that the second wormhole terminus has formed at roughly the same distance from the target star as the first." Ah, now I understood. I also realized that from 60 AU to have the star appear the same would still allow for quite a bit of drift, possibly hundreds of thousands of kilometers or more. We'd need to find the probe we had left behind earlier in order to use precise range finding. On the display, the data indicated that the sensor was receiving the probe's transponder signal. The starfield panned around until we were looking back towards the wormhole terminus the sensor stalk was protruding from. It then zoomed in on an area of starfield just off the top edge of the wormhole, where the flashing marker lights of the probe became visible. The zoom had taken many seconds, and the markers looked quite small, which meant the probe had to be far away. We'd missed, of course. From the probe's location, it also appeared that we'd undershot the first wormhole terminus point and had formed the second much further away from the probe. I quickly found the new data scrolling alongside the image. 743 kilometers and change, I read to the others. That's quite a miss from the first terminus point, right? They looked amongst themselves as puzzled as I was. We all turned to Riho at the same time. She was the one whose augment was a full AI after all. "The discrepancy is amazingly minuscule, Jon," she reported excitedly. "To have missed the target destination by only 743 kilometers out of 81.5 trillion kilometers is virtually perfect." Omu spoke up from her charging mat. "Yes, the test results are quite successful for a first attempt. Truffles and Ukes are quite happy and are hopeful that refinements to the targeting algorithms will reduce the discrepancy." "Are you in contact with my wife?" I asked, now beginning to comprehend just how amazing the second test had been. I saw Alec and Kella smirk at my slip of their mother's present marital status. Omu was kind enough to ignore my gaffe as she answered, "No, but I am monitoring the hyperdata exchange ongoing between the various members of the AI Advisory Council." The android then gracefully stood and moved into our circle. "The result is well within predicted margins. 5 additional refinement tests will now be attempted before Phase 3 begins. These tests may last up to 2 hours and will involve mostly waiting for power levels to recharge. As it is nearing supper, to help pass the time, I suggest we adjourn to the dining area and enjoy nourishment. What would everyone like?" Hannah jumped up. "I'll help you, Omu. I prefer cooked food and I'll decide what I want when I see what's in Jon's pantry." I got up also. "I'll man the grill up on the patio. Everyone okay with barbecued seafood?" 2 hours later, we were back in front of the holo display watching as Phase 3 of the test was about to begin. By way, I did not include Serenity and Cassius. The youngsters had had enough of watching the live-boring tests and had gone for an evening moonlit swim at the North Beach. I did not begrudge them as I remembered, barely, being young, impatient, and in lust. I also had to admit that the past hour had been about as dull as watching paint dry. Despite the boredom for the observers, the Phase 2 trials had gone well, with 6 successful attempts made at forming wormholes near the deployed probe over 8 light-years away. The final three had seen the spherical error of probability drop to less than 100 kilometers. Phase 3 would hopefully reduce this error number drastically. At the same time, new complications would be added. Instead of only forming one wormhole at such an incredible distance, Phase 3 would evaluate our ability to create a second, companion wormhole in close proximity to the first. The tests involving the second wormhole had two purposes. The first was to verify that the modifications made to the Sarissa mechanism on Vesta would allow it to project wormholes at least as far and with the same accuracy as the Phobos installation. The second purpose was to verify if it was possible to link the two wormhole facilities together. We hoped to use the first wormhole to help guide the placement of the second. Much as the old ground-based telescopes of my birth era had used artificial stars projected by lasers to compensate their imaging due to atmospheric distortion, we hoped to use the feedback from the first active wormhole to correct the guidance and ranging for the second. Since the modified Sarissa machine used similar hardware as the already proven Phobos, achieving the first goal was almost a certainty. The second goal, linking the two wormhole facilities using the virtually lagless intra-system wormhole comm systems to pass guidance data back and forth, was the big unknown. They had evaluated the process with some success locally, but Ukes and the AIs debated on whether the process would scale up to the interstellar distances required to successfully target the assemblage arc with extreme precision. Ux would certainly be busy in deep interface, but we had asked Naomi to keep a channel open from Ux's consciousness for us to monitor. She would not be able to directly talk to us or answer any of our questions, but her augment would translate her thoughts and relay relevant summaries to us audibly. That channel suddenly spoke, "Second wormhole forming, Sarissa mechanism apparatus stable. Direct interface linkage between Phobos and Vesta stable. That fucking data repeater. Truffles? I thought we had that. Unnecessary commentary redacted. Test proceeding." I almost laughed at the slip which allowed the inadvertent broadcasting of Uxie's innermost thoughts. She had picked up the outdated, colorful language from her long association with me, but then the thought of my ex-wife merging her mind with the machines so intimately sobered me. The holo display, now a split screen, relayed what was happening on Vesta along with the view from the Phobos wormhole created earlier. A smaller sensor cluster was just entering the smaller, 6-inch diameter Sarissa wormhole, and soon that half of the display now showed a starfield like the first. The view shifted as the new sensor head quickly panned around until Sirius was visible. The dog star and the starfield beyond looked the same in both images, confirming they were at least located in the same general vicinity. Ox's augment reported in again. "We've confirmed that the new spatial disruptions sensor on the Phobos wormhole sensor stalk has detected the gravimetric waves of the second wormhole. We'd expected the recently developed detector to function as we tested it in local space, but to have confirmation that it worked after having passed through an ultra-long-range wormhole was still great news. The new sensor could detect wormholes as they formed or dispersed, but the technology was still too imprecise to gauge true distances and bearings. Both wormhole standard wavelength sensor units detecting the transponder signals from the other. Laser range findings successful. Distance between the two sensor units verified at 987.62 meters, 12.5 meters short of the goal of exactly 1 kilometer of separation. The images on both screens panned slightly and zoomed in. In each, we could see the flashing marker lights of the opposite sensor heads. I shook my head at the audacity of what we had just done. "I'm finding it hard to believe what I am seeing," I said aloud. The others nodded or commented that they felt much the same way. We had just managed to open 2 separate doorways over 8 light-years away and near one of our stellar neighbors, and the locations were just 13 meters shy of a perfect 1 kilometer apart. "Resonance feedback holding stable, adjusting guidance algorithms," the ceiling speaker reported. Like I'd noticed during previous episodes of Deep Interface, Uxie's voice was blended with that of Truffle's AI. That her augment could not even use Uxie's normal voice was perplexing and disturbing. I saw Kella look at Alec. The kids had noticed and were clearly just as concerned as I. What Ux Truffle's last statement confirmed was that the wormhole machines were successfully integrating the feedback data and using it to gain more precision from their targeting algorithms. The next step would be to terminate the Sarissa wormhole and then re-establish it using what they had learned from the first attempt. The goal for the second attempt was to reduce the separation by half and form the Termini with exactly 500 meters separation. They would only be able to try this once, as Vesta had far smaller energy reserves than Phobos, but the test was already being considered a wild success, and I was sure they would run it again in a few days or weeks when power was again sufficient. The Vesta screen showed the microsensor stalk being withdrawn and another independent probe sent through. To fit the narrow wormhole, this second probe was tiny, only the size of an orange. It lacked the full sensor suite as the larger probe sent through 2 hours ago by the Phobos wormhole, but it did manage to squeeze in a camera, a combination laser communicator and rangefinder, and a radio transmitter receiver. Once it was through, it would function as a backup to the earlier probe, and both would act as target points for future tests. The new microprobe's transmitter must be working as we heard. Contact. Sensors penetrating the Phobos wormhole have detected the Sarissa deployed probe. We now had a second autonomous satellite operating in a distant orbit around Sirius. If nothing else, both transmitting probes marked our presence around that distant star and revealed that mankind was interstellar capable. I only hope that nothing smart and aggressive lived in that system to become offended upon receiving our signals. First Sarissa wormhole terminated, attempting second wormhole in 80 seconds. Vesta power reserves at 41%. As we waited, Hannah spoke up. Well, this was the big one. Combining data from 2 wormholes has proven that we can precisely target the second onto any part of the assemblage arc we want. Even though the Sarissa wormholes are too small for our antimatter warheads, they are still large and accurate enough to accommodate acid rain. Kayla and Pickett looked at her with a puzzled expression. Damn it, Hannah! I spoke quickly. Hannah is referring to a smaller, specialized warhead that is still under development. We have not gotten it quite figured out, but as it's unlikely to be needed, it's been placed on the back burner for now. I saw Hannah frown as she realized her slip. Alec reached over and patted her hand. Now attempting the second Sarissa wormhole, the ceiling voice said. It was back to sounding just like my ex-wife. I was not reassured. The first screen was already zoomed in on the anticipated terminus arrival spot, and we actually saw the tiny 16-centimeter Sarissa wormhole form. Wormhole stable, inserting sensor head. The second screen showed motion as the narrow sensor stalk penetrated into this new wormhole. Transponder detected, verifying ranges. I held my breath, but the data came quickly. Distance between both wormholes confirmed at 500.1240 meters. I did the math in my head, but I could already hear cheering from Alec and Hannah. The error was only 124 millimeters. That is well within the accuracy needed. Riho whispered into my ear after I had remained silent. I'd already understood as much, but had remained silent because I was again stunned. I held up my hand, the discrepancy just over half the length of my palm to my fingertips. We had achieved this from over 8 light years away. I finally started chuckling, but with tears betraying my deeper emotions. The test continued for another 3 minutes before the Sarissa wormhole had to be suspended due to lack of power. During that time, they had shifted the smaller wormhole while it remained active by simply shifting its spatial position. The 100-meter shift closer to the first wormhole was nearly flawless. With less than a minute left, they attempted to shift the position of the larger Phobos wormhole. It too was able to adjust its spatial location, although with far less accuracy than the smaller, nimbler Sarissa wormhole. They had aimed for a separation of 200 meters, but had come up over 20 meters long. It was clear that while Phobos had the size and brute force, Vesta had the pinpoint accuracy. Finally, with time running out, the Sarissa wormhole was shifted until the 2 termini were just 5 meters apart. On the split screen, we were able to see close-up views of each of the opposing sensor stalks. Then, just before the smaller wormhole was shut down, the grand finale of the test series came. This involved the launching of a microprobe from the larger Phobos sensor stalk aimed at its new smaller neighbor. The smaller sensor stalk was withdrawn, leaving the petite wormhole a perfect target in space. At only 5 meter separation, it was an easy shot, and this was confirmed when the microprobe bullseyed the boundary and arrived on Vesta. Aside from breaking a new record for total distance traveled by a human-made object, just over 16 light-years round trip, this final test proved that the Sarissa mechanism could compensate for translating distant masses sent from Sirius's spatial vectors and velocities and align them with the local conditions at the asteroid. The test series was complete, and our holo display feed was shut down soon after. We waited around until Ux emerged out of deep interface and again congratulated the exhausted woman. She was graceful in her acceptance, but I could tell that she was both extremely tired and eager to begin analyzing the full data accumulated. I made her promise that she would not work too hard and reminded her that her son would be arriving in Mars orbit in a few days. Now that both wormhole facilities had been proven capable of assemblage range transfers, Hannah and Alec were shifting their base of operation to the Elon 2 orbital station. They'd chosen the station due to the increasing availability of dwelling spaces on the station. The surplus was due to the lessening need for docking interplanetary transports and surface shuttles at the station. Now, with wormhole transport, everyone just arrived on the surface without any intermediary steps and delays. Living on the station, Alec or Hannah were just a short shuttle flight or local wormhole transfer from either Phobos or the surface colonies. Our viewing party broke up after that. Hannah and Alec were staying in the guest cottage down by my workshop and departed using the tubeway. The cottage had 2 bedrooms, but I suspected from the way they'd left holding hands that tonight's excitement would translate to a temporary rekindling of intimacy and that only one bed would need making in the morning. Kayla and Pickett were staying in the guest suite just down the hall. Kayla hugged me goodnight before they made their escape. From experience, I knew that instead of anything carnal, the pair would likely be off in virtual for much of the night. Their augments would see to their shells, resting their physical bodies while their mentality spent accelerated time working in the SRP or other virtual occupations. I was not happy with the way they'd chosen to live, but it was their lives. Naomi assured me that Dionys AI was watching both beings carefully for mental degradation. So far, with their humanity remaining intact and their mentality somewhat sane, I would respect their choice of lifestyle. Serenity and Cassius had not yet returned from the beach area. Omu reported that after the test broadcast had concluded, most of the island's guests had returned from the virtual forum in such high spirits that an impromptu beachside bonfire party had broken out. Serenity and Cassius were overseeing the party and would likely not return until very late, if at all. Riho and I had been invited to come down and join in on the celebration, but we declined. The alien was not a big fan of dancing naked around a fire while under the influence of intoxicants, and I used that as an excuse for my own reluctance to celebrate. The truth was, despite the amazing results of the wormhole experiments, I was in a bit of a mood. Today was also my birthday. 1148 years ago, I had been born. I guess I was just feeling my age. Riho was silent as she followed me to our bedroom. Yes, our relationship had developed to the point that we shared quarters whenever we were together. Was it love for either of us? I wasn't sure of my own feelings, let alone understand what the alien was feeling. I did not think I was feeling a complete and devotional love. I enjoyed Riho's company and thought of the alien ambassador as a good and trusted friend. I think she thought similarly. She maintained that sharing beds was a logical decision as it facilitated my usefulness in relieving her biological shell's occasional need for hormonal release. It only made sense that while doing that chore, my own shell's hormonal needs should be satisfied. Adding to my comfort level in our growing physical relationship was the fact that Riho's shell no longer resembled a child's. We'd arranged for Xenius to buy out Riho's shell lease and had begun growth treatments. In the past 8 months, the shell had grown almost 14 centimeters in height and gained 10 kilograms in mass. While still petite, she now safely appeared as a grown-up, and I felt less like a pedophile. I had my suspicions that there was something more than just physical release developing between us. Sometimes it was because of a glance, or maybe an unnecessary casual touch. Whether the alien was developing feelings similar to those experienced by a human being, or whether I was a fill-in for something she had shared with her fellow Hemru, I did not delve into. And confusing the mix was the fact that she expected, no, demanded that I continue spending time with other women. Angelina had spent time with the both of us a few times back when the Hemru and I first started sleeping together. Aside from the stereotypical male fantasy of the threesome, it had been very instructional for both of us. I'd learned to understand the intimacy needs and body cues of the alien residing inside a human shell, while Riho had learned how to provide what a typical male required to feel fulfillment beyond simple sexual gratification. I refused to inquire what the Hemru did when we were apart. If she simply went without or engaged in simple hookups, I wanted to be the last to know. When I was away on the moon, I mostly stayed with Beatrice Ioveanu. If she was unavailable, I hooked up with one of the station's other female personnel I'd become intimate with over the years. When I'd traveled to Vesta to check on the progress of the acid rain installation, I'd stayed with Sova Deduch. I was fairly certain the alien was not jealous of my activities during those times I'd been away. In fairness, I'd made certain that I never became so with her activities either. What was it like cohabitating with an alien? Well, it was certainly different. Humorous, frustrating, mechanical, surprising, the whole gamut except boring, thankfully. But despite it being all those unpredictable things, it was clearly better than going without them. "John," Riho whispered as we lay in bed after completing another required human hormonal release session. "Happy birthday." Omu must have explained to her why I'd been emotionally up and down tonight. "Yes, another year passes, another mark on the calendar," I replied. She was running her fingers through the hair on my chest. Body hair, any hair actually, was something Hemru lacked, and she enjoyed the novelty. "Your children spoke of it while you were preparing supper," she explained. "They had wanted to have a baked dessert replicated in honor of the occasion, but your android advised them against it." Despite my wish that my birthday go unremarked, I was surprised at the warmth I felt in knowing that at least they'd remembered. I'd have to speak to them about it and thank them for considering me. "It's just another day, Riho. Say, when is your birthday? Do you still count the day you were born?" I asked. "No, I consider this new existence on your world to be that of a separate being. Therefore, I consider my birthday to be the date on which I became aware inside your virtual simulation." I was quiet as I thought about my own past, honest. If I factored my existence and age like Riho did hers, I would have been born when I'd been awakened an agent in Naomi's secret submarine base below the old Kings Bay Naval Base on the Atlantic coast of North America. I had to use my implant to remember the exact date, April 7th of the year 2912. Considered that way, I was only 204, practically a young man. "I want to thank you for being my friend, Zital," I said softly, feeling better. A few months ago, I'd put in the effort required to learn how to properly articulate the sounds of the Hemru's true audible name. I occasionally used it only when we were alone, and for my effort, I sensed her smiling in the darkness next to me. "I'm glad to have you here with me on my birthday," I added. She was silent for a moment before replying, "You are welcome. Let us begin our rest period, John. I fear the near future will be busy for the both of us." She rolled over to her side and was asleep within seconds. Unlike my own old-fashioned sleep preferences, the Hemru had no issues utilizing her augment to shift her body instantly into a deep sleep. "It is efficient, an orc," she'd explain. I like to drift off more gradually, more naturally, mulling over the events of the day I was leaving behind. I rolled over and continued thinking. It occurred to me that I was not the only John who considered this day his birthday. The main other who came to mind was Jonathan on Vesta. After receiving his new shell there nearly a year ago, we'd begun to interact. He'd chosen to reside on the asteroid for the interim, and this proved fortuitous for me as I'd needed someone I could trust on Vesta. Jonathan was perfect and was also gullible enough to agree. "Naomi," I subvocally asked, "is the wormhole comlink to Vesta currently active?" "Yes, John. With the critical work ongoing there, the link is seldom offline." "Good. Is Jonathan awake? I'd like to talk to him." Jonathan is awake, however, due to the recent success of the Sirius star system experiments, and because of an ongoing birthday celebration hosted by fans of his recent biopic. He is currently quite intoxicated. Do you wish to have his augment assist in your discussion with him? Biopic. Shit, that's right. Chelsea had finally released her docudrama on Jonathan last month, and I still hadn't taken the time to virtual it. Well, it sounded like he wasn't suffering from moodiness like I was. I suddenly lost the urge to talk over my troubles with him. No, that's fine. Send a delayed message for when he's sober. Happy birthday, bro. I will see you in 3 or 4 weeks during the final functional readiness inspection. Message sent. Thank you, Naomi. While I have you on, please put me to sleep. I might as well take advantage of the AI to put my worries out of mind. In a matter of seconds, I was out. 2 weeks later, the military wormhole complex on Phobos officially began military operations. Over a 3-day period, interstellar range wormholes were used to place over 40 sensor platforms along the AAV, the estimated approach vector for the oncoming assemblage Ark ship. 20 of the platforms were bulkier and sent with no fractional lightspeed acceleration. Each was dropped at a different location ahead of the expected current position of the enemy Ark to act as a stationary observation post. Once the platform's huge, passive, parabolic dish antennas were deployed, they simply listened for the approaching enemy. In addition to scanning for active emissions, their receivers were tuned to spot the redshifted ionization patterns of interstellar debris or spaceborne particles impacting the bow shields of the enemy vessel. The remainder of the platforms were smaller, lower-mass probes that contained compact infrared telescopes. This group were accelerated spatially to just a fraction of a percent of light speed slower than the enemy Ark, and would survey nearby space for the latent heat of the vessel as it passed by. Even though the telescope probes were traveling at over 7% of light speed, there was still enough of a velocity difference between them and the faster assemblage Ark that detection would be unlikely. Add to this was the fact that our passive probes were shielded from the front, and even on the rare chance that the Ark employed active sensors, they should remain undetected. Over the following week, the smaller, nimble Sarissa wormhole was used to drop in on each deployed probe and relay their search results back home. Also, with the increasing risk and excitement, the public was finally showing interest. This meant that some were also beginning to worry and publicly expressing their doubts and concerns. Naomi reported that because of the public's heightened awareness, attempts to contact me directly had risen over 300%. I was also being nominated for attendance at briefings on Conscientia Daily. I decided to withdraw even further. Applications to vacation on Heels tripled and included people who Naomi had on her watch list. Due to my increased notoriety, I'd considered a suspension in hosting all guests on my island, but Serenity objected. I compromised and instead decided to simply stay away from Heels for the duration. To help detach me from the island, I went as far as formally ceding any direct control I had over the place for the next 2 decades. Eudaimonia posted a notice on all public forums of my plans to avoid the island, and that my lease had been transferred to my descendants, with Serenity being officially named as manager of the island in my absence. The notice also stipulated that no one from my extended family could ever be barred from visiting and using the island if they wished. I planned to utilize that loophole if I happened to be in the area in the future. Adele even videoed me and Riho packing up our belongings. I had all my wood carving projects and art supplies shipped off to my acreage in South Dakota and placed into storage in the barn. With all the traveling I'd be doing in the near future, I doubted I'd have much free time to enjoy the hobby. I did arrange to have my drawing and painting supplies, including with my traveling gear. Riho and I had started doing both together when we had the spare time. Riho elected to suspend her own public appearances and remain with me. I'd left the choice up to her after pointing out the pros and cons. She actually took some time to consider her reply before agreeing to remain at my side. Though I'd expected this, as the alien always considered every decision carefully, I was still surprised at the hit to my pride from her delayed and considered response. We began to travel almost constantly. First, there were repeated trips to the moon to see to the final transfer of research operations to the production facility on Mars. Most of the human staff at Farside were transferring as well, either to Phobos or down to one of the surface facilities of Mars itself. Before we turned off the metaphorical lights on Luna, we had a big congratulatory party to thank everyone for their hard work and to wish each other well moving forward. Riho and I stayed with Beatrice after the party. I was exhausted and quickly went to bed, leaving the two science-minded beings talking shop in the living room. Later, I awoke to find that the Hemru had sent Beatrice to join me in her stead. She had been aware that Beatrice was an occasional lover during the times I'd stayed with her. Thankfully, Beatrice was aware of my newer hesitancy due to Riho's nearby presence and did not seek anything physical. We simply went to sleep and enjoyed each other's closeness. In the morning, Beatrice had given the alien a long hug in thanks for her generosity. Because of our own pending Martian relocation, when we were back on Earth, we began to visit as many long-absent friends and family as we could. I finally introduced Riho to my daughter Charity and her partner Mizuko during a day trip to Africa. I also met my new grandson Kenzo, who had been born to Mizuko less than a month earlier. Riho commented that the chubby newborn reminded her of a larval Hemru. Luckily, my daughter and her partner laughed off the comment. I was glad that I had kept my agreement to myself. I'm sure the tyke would grow out of his grub-like stage soon enough. When Omu and Charity went off to talk privately, I noticed Riho watching them with clear curiosity. I'd explained to the alien earlier how I'd raised my most recent child as a single parent and how Omu had acted as Charity's surrogate mother. Riho was fascinated about their relationship, and I braced myself for a series of awkward questions. She surprised me when she did not probe the issue further. Either she accepted the situation as simply another human quirk, or was now versed enough in human interactions to be polite and save any questions for later discussion in private. We did not stay long, as the newly expanded family was busy packing for their own relocation. They were moving from Africa to the frozen wastelands, Mizuko's words, not mine, of Canada to oversee the population of mastodons, which had been relocated there early in the spring. I reminded them that my acreage would be nearby and to visit whenever they wished. I learned that not only would they be based out of Canada, but they would be splitting their time to monitor the new herds, which had been established in Siberia. Maybe that was why Kenzo had been allowed to become so chubby. At least their travels would allow them to visit Japan more often, which was where Kenzo's other grandparents resided. Our next visit was to meet up with my final daughter Larissa near Old Istanbul. Hannah joined us for this trip as Larissa had always considered her as her mother. I'd hired Hannah to carry Larissa to term and was smart enough to have her stick around for the next 10 years. As I had expected, Hannah had been a great mother to Larissa, and I was happy for them both. Of all my children, I considered Larissa to be the most compassionate and nurturing. She'd done a great job raising my grandson Ben, and from what I'd seen of Serenity, Ben and Sahun had done an amazing job raising my great-granddaughter as well. I knew that Hannah was a key reason for all that parental success. Hannah was in the middle of her own goodbye tour. She was leaving for Mars in just 2 days to join Alec, who'd left Earth 2 weeks ago. She'd brought her augmented dog Misty along to get to know Larissa. Surprisingly, it had been my daughter who had first suggested that she watch the augmented dog while Hannah was off-planet. Hannah had planned on just suspending the dog in a medical creche back at her lodge in Utah, but now was leaving the decision up to Misty. If the dog enjoyed Larissa's company and my daughter did not have second thoughts, he would be staying here. I expected this option to be a given, as the seaside Istanbul villa where Larissa was currently residing had a nearby population in the hundreds. The population included dozens of other enhanced pets, and Misty would no doubt enjoy the social interaction of his peers. We planned to depart just after supper. Hannah left first after privately saying goodbye to Larissa and thoroughly loving up her dog Misty. I was able to overhear her final comments to the augmented pet. "You be the good boy while I'm gone. I will call you whenever I can." That was likely the key reason Hannah was so willing to leave her longtime companion behind. The dog's augment would allow him to enter virtuality, and with the wormhole comm link allowing high bandwidth communications to Mars, Hannah would easily be able to visit and play with Misty virtually. While not as good as the real thing, the visits would help each other get through the separation. I made a note to remember that I could do the same with many of those I was leaving behind. Hannah left on her rented hopper. She would be using the nearby public wormhole network to make her way to the interplanetary pickup point and then on to Mars. Soon it was Omu, Riho, and me taking our turn to say goodbye. Riho went first, politely thanking my daughter for the meal and explaining that she was happy that they had finally gotten to meet physically. Omu went next while Riho waited. The android and my daughter remained silent, but shared a long hug. They likely chatted often via my daughter's implants, and no words were needed now. My wormhole to Querencia formed, and I watched it transport Riho and Omu back to the sub, leaving my daughter and me alone for the moment until the empty tube returned. She is very interesting, Dad. At times I forgot she's actually an alien, but then she would do or say something that would remind me, my daughter said. I know what you mean. I'm amazed at how human-like she's become since she arrived, I replied. You seem to get along with her very well. Do you have feelings for her? I laughed, suddenly recalling the old movie, My Stepmother is an Alien. Yes, but only as a good friend. I do not think the Hemru quite feel love the same way humans do. Maybe it's a difference in our biochemistry or something. Thankfully, my daughter did not probe the subject further, nor point out that Riho had been living with the biochemistry of a human for almost a year. It was not that I was embarrassed, but more that I preferred to not reveal the extent to which I was actively working to prevent my own feelings from becoming closer towards the alien. It would not be prudent for the ruler of mankind to fall for an alien emissary who was incapable of matching those same feelings, or worse, would logically exploit those feelings in some way to the benefit of her species. Still, I caught my daughter continuing to look at me speculatively. We are just good friends, Lissa. No half-grub, half-siblings in your future, I quipped. Gross, she said, smacking me in the shoulder while smiling at my use of my pet name for her. Naomi signaled via my implant that the sub's energy levels had been replenished and that the wormhole was ready. I replied that she should go ahead, and shortly after, the portal had formed and the transport tube waiting. I gave my daughter a long hug and told her I'd visit her in virtual as often as I could. Moments later, I was back aboard Querencia and making my way through the access tunnel leading to the main salon. While traveling by private wormhole may have been the ultimate in luxury, it also made for incredible bouts of jet lag due to the instant time zone changes. Riho and I had been forced to often use our implants to help regulate our circadian rhythms as we poked ourselves around the planet attending meetings and calling on friends and family. For our travels, we'd utilize the wormhole machinery on Querencia to such an extent that Naomi had to dock the sub to a nearby underwater mining facility to supplement its energy reserves. Then, with mining activity temporarily suspended due to the boat drawing all available local power, Naomi was finally able to begin recharging the sub's ESU storage cells and powering down its fusion reactor to perform basic maintenance. Riho and I took advantage of the lull and the stillness of the quiet, bottom-sitting boat to get some well-needed rest. At first, the Hemru had been nervous about being on board Querencia due to its current depth of nearly 400 meters beneath the Indian Ocean. I had to resort to a long massage, grooming, and hormonal release session to get her to relax. Naomi helped distract the alien by projecting simulated tranquil views of a dry desert surface on the 4 large lounge view screens. The AI increased the realism by adding a random breeze, complete with a soundtrack of evening outdoor surface noises. After Riho was mentally calm and physically sated, we descended the spiral stairs leading to the sub's berthing level and went to bed. Our augments had been instructed to help us sleep soundly and for far longer than necessary. I'd gone to sleep happy with the expectations of waking sometime the next day at my leisure. I'd maybe sleep in, maybe even order breakfast in bed. Alas, that was not to be, for in one instant my deep sleep was interrupted and I became aware in a bright, sterile white bubble of virtuality. As had happened the few other times I had been abruptly ejected from REM sleep, I momentarily lacked full access to my memories and higher reasoning. My instinctive animal mind panicked, and I crouched to the floor. Beside me, I heard the sharp intake of breath of another person, undergoing the same mental trauma. As our eyes met, my mind caught up enough to recognize the confused-looking virtual form next to me was Ambassador Riho. I next realized that we were in virtual and remembered that we'd most recently gone to bed aboard Querencia. An animated sunflower appeared in front of us as we recovered enough to stand. John, Riho, I apologize for interrupting your sleep period so abruptly, but Uxe Esperanza authorized the action which allowed overriding your current message settings. Despite my abrupt wakening, I almost smiled at the sight of the talking sunflower. The AI's cartoonish avatar reminded me of an old TV advertisement, but I could not recall the product. "What is it, Naomi?" I asked. "Elements of the deployed sensor fleet have just reported back that they have confirmed the location of the assemblage arc.